Welcome back to Press Review In Depth. Today, delegates from more than 20 countries will meet in Paris to discuss how to combat the Islamic State. US Secretary of State John Kerry was in Saudi Arabia last week to meet with Arab leaders in an attempt to form a coalition, but with limited success, with key countries such as Germany, Turkey, Jordan and Egypt less than enthusiastic to team up with the US on its mission. Some observers are saying that this alliance pales in comparison to the 2003 coalition of the willing. Let's take a look at some press analyses. News website Breitbart features an analysis that says the coalition refusing Obama's Islamic State fight is far bigger than the one helping it. Thomas Rose says that although the coalition of the willing, led by George W. Bush in 2003, has now been ridiculed, only 9 nations are part of what President Obama grandiosely titles his broad coalition to assist the US effort to degrade and eventually destroy the Sunni terrorist ISIS army in what is now officially being called a very significant counter-terrorist operation. What actual support those states have in fact offered remains unclear. Rose adds a scathing front-page analysis of President Obama's non-existent coalition in Friday's New York Times contends that his call to arms to fight ISIS is getting less than an enthusiastic welcome, with leading allies like Egypt, Turkey, all finding ways to avoid specific commitments. He adds US Secretary of State Kerry also found it difficult to rally allies to partner in a war that the American administration refuses to call a war. Of course, according to US constitutional law, no president can unilaterally declare war. Only Congress has the power to do that. The article also says, meanwhile, Russia announced it not only opposed US efforts to build a coalition, but that it would actively work to defend the embattled Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad in international forums and with help on the battlefield. And RIA Novosti features an analysis from a Middle East expert who says Iran is critical in fighting the Islamic State. The piece says last week US Secretary of State John Kerry said that it would be inappropriate for Tehran to join the US-led coalition to counter the jihadist group due to Tehran's engagement in Syria and elsewhere. As a result, Iran was not invited to take part in an international conference on Iraqi security taking place in Paris today. RIA Novosti's analyst says considering that Iran is majorly involved in fighting IS militants in Iraq, keeping it out of the discussion is almost unrealistic. Iran is not involved, but in reality it is the Iranians who are helping above anyone else in Iraq, helping the government forces and Shia militias as well as Peshmerga in Kurdistan. And the article says costs are greater by having Iran in openly than having them do what they are doing on the sidelines quietly. To discuss, I'm now joined by political analyst and journalist Hafsa Kara Mustapha. Thank you for joining us, Hafsa.
Thanks for having me.
So leaders are meeting today in Paris to develop plans for a coalition, and there are of course reasons why many leaders are too reticent to commit to this coalition. Do you see any progress being made?
Well, it's difficult to say, but just picking up on your review of Breitbart, I think the idea that Bush had a greater coalition and today there's a smaller one, really the two are very much connected. The reason why everyone is lukewarm regarding a US intervention is precisely because of the previous interventions that have gone so badly, so wrong. You know, we now see that Iraq is a basket case. We've seen Libya as well. So really there is reluctance to actually engage in any way with the US. Would there be any progress? I think there's likely to be, because of course all the countries that have signed up do want to see an end, or rather limit the scope of ISIS, because of course there is irony that the Gulf countries who funded and supported ISIS affiliates in Syria are now turning against the very same groups that they supported a few years ago. So really there's got to be a lot of sort of lining and negotiating over what the actions should be, given that it's been very opaque and it's been very blurred, and also the role that very many players have played, really, from the US to the Gulf monarchies, in supporting and funding the groups that were in fact the very origins of ISIS.
And as you said, the coalition is facing scepticism because of the failures of past US coalitions. Is there also maybe a belief on some parts that the US has hidden motives?
Well, again, you know, if you accept blindly that ISIS this sort of very evil, huge force that is a massive threat to the West, then, you can't blindly accept what the US is saying. ISIS are a nefarious and a very negative group that is detrimental to stability in the Middle East, and we've seen that they've targeted essentially locals, where Muslims, Shia, Sunni Muslims, but of course also Christian minorities. So they are very negative. They're a force for bad in the region, and they have to be tackled by regional powers. But of course, what the US does is really playing a double game. One minute they're funding them, they're supporting them. We've seen evidence of them using arms that were very much provided to them by the US, or indirectly at least. So it is very difficult to sort of navigate around this issue and work out who is doing what and for what benefit. Now, does the US have a hidden agenda? Of course it does, because any intervention in the Middle East has so far been very negative. It hasn't brought anything better to the region, and therefore there's no reason to expect that a bombing campaign that will indiscriminately kill many civilians will bring some sort of goods to the region.
Yeah, as you say, there has been a lot of hypocrisy from the US and the West. How now will America, the people in power in the US, explain to the American public its new stance towards President Assad? He was the bad guy, and now could he be a potential ally?
Well, again, I mean, this is why the beheadings of these Westerners have been almost instrumental in selling this war. So for the past 6 months, we've seen this group killing and slaughtering its way across the Middle East, with anyone barely lifting a finger or any words of condemnation. Of course, the minute James Foley was presented and supposedly beheaded, I'm saying supposedly because there have been very credible reports that some of the footage were fake. But anyway, regardless, there have been Western victims, and all of a sudden it's being presented as the peak of barbarity, as sort of a group that has no equal, and therefore the Americans are sort of seeing the footage of their fellow people being killed and obviously signing up. And we've seen this so often. You demonize your adversary to a certain extent that people will immediately support any war effort. And of course, Americans being slightly gung-ho and always in favor of sort of violent solution to any problem as opposed to negotiating or any other form of diplomatic talk, then I think engaging in a war is going to be an easy sell for the American public. Now, in terms of negotiating with Assad, well, many American analysts have already come up and said, well, actually, we've already discussed with Assad. We've already been in coalitions with him against Saddam Hussein in the first Gulf War, the Assad government, that is. So there's no reason why we shouldn't engage once again. I think the Americans are very good at playing several games at the same time, as long as it suits their agenda. So there is absolutely no reason why, with a good PR campaign, they couldn't actually sell another war in the Middle East, and again, sort of an association with Assad as well.
Indeed. The fact that Russia has made it clear it will not have any part in this, do you think that hinders this coalition from the start?
Well, no, not really, because obviously the situation between the West and Russia is very bad. It started off over Syria, but of course the situation has deteriorated over Ukraine. So if anything, it's almost an extra selling point for the US to say, well, there you go. Russia, the big evil Russia, as it is presented today in the mainstream Western media, is not on board. That it almost means that it's an actual bonus for the coalition, Barack Obama's coalition, to say, well, there you go. If we're going against the Russians, that almost is a guarantee that we're doing something right. And I think that's not very helpful either way.
The actual plan seems to be to allow moderate rebels to come into the space that ISIS is now occupying, to take over that space. What effect do you think this will have?
Well, again, we're playing with words here, and it's all about semantics. What are moderate rebels? We have heard various reports saying that the moderate rebels, as you're describing them, were the ones who sold, I think, one of the hostages to ISIL. So, in effect, what exactly does moderate mean when we've seen that for the past 3 years there have been beheadings as well, there have been massacres, there have been rapes. I mean, the sort of level of crimes being committed in Syria are very similar to those committed by ISIS. So it's very difficult to establish who is moderate and who isn't in this scenario. But again, I think we're just playing on words just to sort of sell an extra conflict.
Thank you very much, Hafsa, for joining us.
Thank you.
For more updates, please visit levant.tv. and subscribe to MidEast In Depth on iTunes. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.